Okay, so welcome to Child Psychology, Psych 235. Today we're starting a new chapter. We're going to be talking about middle childhood cognitive development, and that's chapter 12. Remember that cognitive development has to do with learning, memory, information processing, language, that kind of stuff. So we're going to talk about all of this stuff. I was looking at it last night, and it's a lot of information, but we're not going to deal with all of it today. Okay, so yes, we'll talk about Piaget's final stage. No, that's not Piaget's final stage, but we'll talk about one of Piaget's theory, one of Piaget's stages of development. Then we'll talk about moral development, get into information processing, and language, and the rest will probably have to wait until Tuesday. So let's get started. So we're still talking about ages 7 to 11 years of age. So we are, when it comes to Piaget's theory, it's actually at ages 6 to 11 years of age that is considered middle childhood. So we're still talking about Piaget's theory, and we're at the concrete operation stage. Okay, there's 4 stages to Piaget's theory. This is the stage when children can perform logical operations on their environment, but only on concrete objects. That's why it's called the concrete operation stage. This is basically when children can operate on or understand things that are physical, things they can see and hear and taste and touch, right? Things that they can understand that are physical. Okay, so they're good at that stuff. Okay, it's a good time to teach them basically math and science through the use of objects. You can teach them how to add and subtract, multiply and divide by using objects, by using blocks, coins, marbles, beads, that kind of stuff, because that's at the stage they're at. They understand concrete things, okay, and they can think logically, systematically, in a step-by-step fashion about those things. So now they understand those things that they had trouble with at the previous stage. So now they understand classification, for instance. So now they can organize things into hierarchies. Food, for instance, can contain categories like meat, grain, fruit. Could also contain sweets and other things, right? Remember the food pyramid. That's not really the food pyramid there, but food is the general category, and it contains other categories within that, other information. That's classification. Now they understand identity, right? The idea that certain features of an object remain, the idea that certain characteristics of an object remain the same even if other characteristics change. In other words, an object can look different, but it's still the same number, volume, etc. And that has to do with conservation. Okay, now they understand conservation. Remember all those things they didn't understand before that have to do with conservation, right? Now they understand that stuff, and it's not so much of an issue for them. Here's an image for you guys so you understand the conservation task, right? So remember, during the previous stage of Piaget's theory, the pre-operational stage, okay, they didn't understand that when you take two glasses of, let's say, fluid over here, picture image 1, pick there A and B, the 2 glasses, right? And you take one of them and you pour it into a taller, thinner glass. So now we're on image 2, right? They don't understand that those 2 glasses still have the same amount of fluid. They didn't understand that in the pre-operational stage. Now they do, okay? Because the identity, right, really remains the same. It's the same amount, okay? That's what we mean by that. So now they understand conservation, okay? They also understand reversibility, okay? The idea that something has been changed can be returned to its original state. Something can be changed, and it can often be changed back. For example, you can pour liquid from one container to another, making it look like one container has more, but you can pour it back to the original container so that you can see that it's still the same amount. You can reverse it. That's reversibility. Reciprocity is similar. Reciprocity or inversion, the idea that 2 things may change in opposite ways in order to balance each other. So in that conservation task I just showed you guys, right? The wider, shorter container holds the same amount as the one that is taller and thinner, because the height and the width balance each other. Okay, that's reciprocity or inversion. What children lack during this stage is logical abstract thinking. Okay, they are at the concrete operational stage. They understand physical objects, how to think logically about those things. So now conservation is not a problem, for instance, but they have problems with things that are abstract. Things that are abstract, we're talking about things that they have to imagine, things that are a bit more theoretical, things that are not necessarily physical, right? So logical thinking about things that are more mental, right? Like democracy. What the heck is democracy, right? It's more of an idea, not something they can really touch, right? Children have difficulty understanding what you mean when you talk about democracy or when you talk about government, right? Ethics, justice, those kind of things. Physics, though physics often refers to things that are physical, right? That's why it's called physics, right? The movement of things and how things behave, right? How physical things behave. Even though it's about those things, right? It actually deals with a lot of things that are theoretical. Equations and math and, you know, complicated math. And even when you are dealing with physical things, you have to imagine how they work or how they would work under different circumstances. So it's actually, physics is actually very hard because it involves a lot of abstract thinking. That's what children are not good at yet. That will be the last stage. They'll get that later. Here's the conservation task again that I already showed you guys. So I'm just going to move on. Now let's talk about moral development. Moral development, I think, is a bit more interesting. What is moral development? When we talk about moral development, we're talking about right and wrong, right? Understanding right and wrong. So it's the process by which children adopt principles that lead them to evaluate given behaviors as right and others as wrong, and to govern their own actions in terms of these principles. Okay, so it's their understanding of right and wrong, okay? What they believe about that. What is right and what is wrong? That's moral development. Children's understanding of that changes as they get older, okay? How do children think about right and wrong? How do they do that, right? How do they learn what is right and wrong? How do they behave in moral situations? And how does that, it doesn't say there, but how does that change as they get older? So we're gonna go over several theories of morality or of moral development. First, Piaget's theory. Yes, Piaget also has a theory of moral development. He doesn't have the best known theory, the most influential theory, that would be Kholberg, that we're gonna talk about next, but he has his own theory too. So this is Piaget's theory here. According to Piaget, from birth to about 4 years of age, children have no morality. Why is it that they have no morality? Because they don't really understand right and wrong yet. Okay, they're kind of just, you know, crawling around, they walk, you know, they may throw things and do this and that. And they're really too young for parents to really, you know, get mad at them or really teach them much about right and wrong, because they don't really understand much yet. So they have no morality. They are amoral. By about 4 years of age, then they start getting into some real trouble and parents start expecting more from them, and then things change. But before years of age, they have no morality. They have no understanding of right and wrong, according to Piaget. Rules are meaningless. They are unaware of violations. The rules don't mean anything to them. They don't understand them. And when they do something wrong, they don't really know that they did anything wrong. So they have no morality. And then they enter the next stage of Piaget's theory, his theory of morality. 4 to 7 years of age. This is when children believe that, you know, they start understanding morality a bit more. They start understanding some things are right, some things are wrong. But they believe that rules are fixed and unchangeable, right? There are certain rules and they don't change, right? So they believe these rules come from authority, right? Parents make the rules, or maybe it's God, right, if they're religious. And the rules have to be obeyed without question. Okay, that's called moral realism, right? There is such a thing as right and wrong, and it's real and you can't really change it. It's just the way things are. It's the rules that mom and dad made, or the rules that God made, or whatever it is, right? That's from 4 to 7 years of age, moral realism. Judgments of right and wrong are based on consequences of behavior, right? So the consequences matter. If they break 5 dishes, it's worse than breaking 1. So keep in mind that, yeah, consequences, we're talking about here, physical consequences. They're young still, and they understand morality at first in terms of what actually happens right, after they do something, if there's a consequence, right, let's say they get punished, that means they did something wrong, okay? Breaking the rules will be met by imminent justice, imminent punishment, okay? Immediate punishment, I should say, right? That's called imminent justice, okay? That means that justice is going to happen right away, right? They do something wrong, they're going to be punished immediately. That's what children believe. As they get a little bit older, 7 to 11 years of age, they develop what's called autonomous morality. Auto means self. That means morality here is a little bit different. They think more about it, becomes a bit more abstract, right? Children realize that individuals actually make the rules, and the rules can change. Autonomous morality, okay? So it can rules can kind of change, okay? They're autonomous, and so in other words, they don't stay the same. They can change, and people change them, okay? And we can change these rules for ourselves, right? They understand that now. Punishment is linked to intent. Accidents are forgivable. Now they realize that, you know, there's certain things that could be wrong when they do them, but that if they didn't intend them, that it's not as bad as if they did intend it. It was an accident. Accidents are forgivable, right? If you break a dish accidentally, right? Sure, you can be punished, but not that much, okay? Now, if you get a dish and you throw it against the wall, right, because you're upset, you did that intentionally. And in this case, you're going to get more severe punishment, right? So punishment is linked to intent. Intent matters. Did you actually mean to do it or not? If you didn't, if it was accidental, it's not as bad as if you did intend it, okay? That's Piaget's theory of morality, okay? It's okay. It's not that great. Here's a better theory for you guys. And the one I usually cover, if I talk about morality at all and there's not much time, I usually cover this theory. It's Lawrence Kohlberg's theory of morality. He has the best known and the most influential theory of moral development. Okay, so Kohlberg liked to use these things called a moral dilemma. What he did is he presented moral dilemmas, which are, it's a situation, conflict situation where choices have to be justified. Let me explain. It's basically there is a situation, there's a problem, and you have to make a decision. And no matter what you decide, there are good things and bad things, right? That's a dilemma. There is no perfect solution for this problem. No matter what you do, there's going to be problems. Okay, so what are you going to do? Okay, you have to justify, rationalize your decision. And Kohlberg basically wanted to understand how children of different age, or how people of different age, understand morality. So he presented these moral dilemmas. One that he liked to present, he often presented, was called the Heinz dilemma. But there are others. There's the brother's dilemma, the prisoner's dilemma. There are many. This is one that he commonly used, the Heinz dilemma. So I'm going to give you the gist of the story, okay, because it's a lot longer than this. But here's the gist of it, okay, just so you understand what the Heinz dilemma is. So Heinz was this guy, okay? He had his wife, right? And they were married, right? You know, and his wife was dying. So Heinz's wife was near death, okay? And there was a druggist that discovered a drug that might save her. Okay, so there was a drug available that could save her. Doesn't have to be a druggist, a pharmaceutical company, okay, developed a drug that could save her, okay, let's say, right? The drug cost $200 to make, but the druggist or the pharmacy or the, you know, the pharmaceutical company wanted $2,000 for it, right? So because they wanted to make money. That's capitalism for you guys, right? Heinz could not afford it, right? And he could only borrow $1,000 from his friends. He's still $1,000 short, right? To pay, he offered to pay the rest for the rest of it later, but the druggist, you know, the pharmacist, right? Pharmaceutical company, they refused, right? Should Heinz steal the drug? What should he do? So the gist of it is, his wife is dying. There's a drug that could save her. He cannot afford it, right? No insurance, right? Doesn't have enough money. He can't get it without the money. What should he do? Should he steal the drug, save his wife's life, right? Or should he not steal the drug, let his wife die? Obviously, one of those choices is better than the other. But Heinz was not interested in whether you said yes or no to whether Heinz should steal the drug. He was interested in your reasoning, right? Your justification. Why yes, why no? And when he asked children this, he presented these dilemmas to children, to teenagers, and to adults. He found different ways of thinking, different justifications. So from this, he developed his levels of morality. Kohlberg stages of development. They're more like levels. There's level 1, 2, and 3. Level 1, 4 to 10 years of age, right? Starts at 4 because just like Piaget, Kohlberg believed that children have no morality. They don't really understand right and wrong before 4 years of age. So level 1 is 4 to 10 years of age. It's called the preconventional level, okay? Morality is based on rewards and punishments. So what do children understand early on? They understand physical consequences, okay? Notice this is similar to Piaget's concrete operation stage, right? Where children understand physical things, okay? That's the level they're at. So right and wrong are based on what happens physically, physical consequences, right? If you get rewarded, that means you did the right thing. If you get punished, it means you did the wrong thing. That's what children understand. That's the preconventional level. And there are sub-stages. Stage 1 is called punishment and obedience. Punishment and obedience orientation, where children obey rules to avoid punishment, right? You know, so a child at this stage, when asked, should Heinz steal the drug, you know, to save his wife, a child might say no, because if he steals the drug, he'll go to jail, right? He'll be punished, right? That's stage 1. Stage 2 is called naive instrumental realism, instrumental behaviorism, right? Where children obey rules for self-interest. They are vaguely aware of fairness, right? It's you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours kind of thing, right? So with stage 2, basically, they do something because it's good for them, okay? It has to do with self-interest. So if you ask a child, should Heinz steal the drug? A child, for instance, might say yes. Yes, because, you know, Heinz should steal the drug so that his wife will love him, right? In other words, I'll do something for her, she'll do something for me, right? It's a good thing for me to do this, right? That's instrumental realism. You scratch my back, I'll scratch yours, right? I'll steal the drug for you, you love me back, you know, that kind of thing. All right. So notice level 1 is basically physical consequences. That's what children understand. That's what morality is based on. Let's give you another example. All right. It doesn't have so much to do with children, but just so you understand a little bit better. Right. Let's say they ask you, hey, should marijuana be legalized? I know that it's already been legalized in several states, but it's not legal at the federal level. But let's say they ask you that question. If your answer is something like, well, I like weed, I smoke weed, so yeah, they should legalize it, right? You're at level 1, the preconventional level, right? You're at the lowest level of morality. You believe in something because it's good for you or because you like it. That's level 1. And then there's level 2, which is called the conventional level. This spans from about 10 to 13 years, according to Kohlberg. This is when children desire the approval from individuals in society. Level 2, the conventional level, basically, this is where children believe something is right or something is wrong because that's what other people believe. They desire other people's approval, so they agree with them. So in other words, what is right and what is wrong depends on what other people think is right, what other people think is wrong, because they want to be approved of by those people. Stage 3, right? Good boy, nice girl morality, right? You begin to judge behavior by intention. So should Heinz steal the drug? You might say yes, because people will think you're a bad person if you don't save your wife, right? So in other words, what matters is what other people think. You need to be a good boy, a nice girl, right? You need to do what other people say is right. That's level 2. You're basically just following the crowd, okay? Stage 4, law and order mentality, right? Where children are concerned with authority and social order, right? Should Heinz steal the drug? A child might say no, because one should be a good citizen and obey the law. The law is what other people have decided. The law is what other people say is right. So they are at the conventional level. They still desire the approval of other people. So level 2 basically means you're going along with the crowd. You want approval from others, so you agree with them. That's level 2. Again, if you're asked, you know, just for the sake of understanding, I know it's not about children, but if you're asked, should they legalize marijuana? And you say, well, you know, everybody's smoking weed, so why not? They should legalize it, right? Or, you know, or if you say something like, well, my parents taught me that drugs are bad and that people shouldn't use them, so I don't think they should legalize it. That is level 2. You are not thinking for yourself. You're just going along with the crowd, whoever that crowd happens to be. Maybe you're just following your family, the church, right? Your friends, or whatever they teach you at school. You are not thinking for yourself. It's level 2. You're just going along with the crowd. You just want the approval of other people, so you agree with them. There's a higher level of thinking called level 3, 13 years and onward. And according to Kohlberg, not all people get here. There's some people who never reach this level. Some people who are incapable of the highest level of morality. But if children do get there, they usually get there by 13, but some never do. Okay, it's called the post-conventional level. This is when you achieve true morality. This is really when you understand what it means for something to be right, what it means for something to be wrong. This is based on internal standards. That means it's based on your own thinking. No longer does it have to do with following the crowd or just listening to somebody's opinion, okay? Or just agree with somebody's opinion. It's based on your own internal standards, right? What you think, but not just that. It's based on your own enlightened conscience. What that means is that it's based on your understanding of what justice actually means, of what right and wrong actually means, right? Whatever it is that you're considering, whether it's freedom of speech, right? Or whether it's legalization of something, right? Like marijuana, which some people consider to be freedom of expression, which is a form of speech, right? If that's what you're thinking about, if that's what you're basing your choices on, it's based on your understanding of some abstract thing about what it really means, right? And it's your own thinking, you're not just copying someone, then you're at level 3. You're at true morality, you're at the post-conventional level. Okay, stage 5, that's stage 5 and 6. Okay, so stage 5, the best values are those based on law because they are accepted by society. You can still argue for law and order at this level. Okay, so when somebody is asked, should Heinz steal the drug, right? Somebody could say no, right? Heinz should not steal the drug, right? Heinz should obey the law. Laws are made to benefit society. People should obey the law, right? Laws are important. Without laws, we have anarchy, we have chaos, right? So you're making a philosophical argument. That is level 3, right? You're really thinking. It's an enlightened conscience. It's a philosophical argument. It's something that's abstract, right? So you can argue for law and order at that level, that it's necessary, right? But you can also be at stage 6, an even higher level, right? Where an informed conscience governs morality, where people judge what is right and wrong based on their own internal standards, based on what they think. And it's a philosophical argument. So someone could, when somebody is asked, right, should Heinz steal the drug? Somebody could say, yes, Heinz should steal the drug because human life is more precious than laws, right? You're making a philosophical argument. You can add to that by saying things like, you know, when human life and law come into conflict, human life should always win. And we shouldn't have to follow laws that do not protect human life or laws that are useless and get in the way of progress and of actually protecting people. Those laws should not be followed, right? You're making a philosophical argument. But notice, level 3 is true morality, right? This is the highest level of moral thinking, when you decide something is right and wrong based on what you think and based on your understanding of the issue. So when we talk about legalizing marijuana, if you think about it as basically a freedom of expression, which is also a freedom of speech, right? Which is in the Constitution, right? And you say, therefore, it's okay to use marijuana, right? When you make that kind of argument, that's a philosophical argument, right? That's level 3 morality. But then again, it has to be your own argument. It can't just be that you read that somewhere and therefore you agree with it, okay? You're just copying somebody else's opinion, right? That's level 2. This is when you think for yourself. And that is what you guys should do, by the way, when you vote for president, when you vote on issues, on proposition this or that, right? Read the damn thing for yourself. Make up your own mind. Try to understand what it really means. Don't just go along with the commercials or the ads that you get in the mail, or just what people tell you about it, because people have agendas, whether they're, conservatives, liberals, moderates, whatever it is, or maybe they work for a certain industry and they want you to vote a certain way so they benefit. Think about it on your own and make up your own mind. Think about what it really means. That's level 3 morality. And I will give you some bad news about this. Most people do not think this way. Most people just go along with the crowd, right? and are led away by commercials and opinions and what other people tell them, right? What the group thinks, whether it's Democrats or Republicans, right? They just go along with the group and they're not thinking for themselves. And it's a big problem when people don't think for themselves, because in the past, we have had some serious issues because people did not think for themselves. In the past, slavery was legal. Guess what? Most people agreed with it and it was wrong. We know that it's wrong now because other people challenged it, were thinking at level 3 and went beyond that and changed society. There are still things that we have today that are wrong, and most of us actually agree that they're right. And sometime in the future, right, that will change because of people who are thinking for themselves now and saying, I don't care that most people agree with this. It is still wrong because of this, this, and this. We still have injustice. We still have things that are wrong, and we just accept. And they're not right. You need to think for yourself, right? You need to understand what things really mean and not just be led away with the crowd, because the crowd is really not that smart, okay? They go along with popular opinion, including the Supreme Court, by the way. The Supreme Court in the past ruled that Black people, right, slaves, were property, okay? Slavery was legal, like in the 1800s or whenever the heck it was. And some slaves sued, right? The Dred Scott case, he sued for his freedom. If the Supreme Court knew what the hell they were doing, if they were thinking at this level, they would have agreed with him that people have a right to be free, right? That's what it means. That's what true justice means. But of course, just like everybody else, right? They were just going along with popular opinion, and they ruled that no, Black people, slaves, right? At the time, Black people were enslaved. They are property and they have no rights, right? They were basically thinking at a lower level. They were just going along with the majority at the time, which agreed with slavery, But of course, Black people didn't count as far as, people's opinion. They didn't ask them what they thought. Somebody sued for their justice, and the Supreme Court denied their freedom, right? That shows you that the Supreme Court usually goes with popular opinion too. It depends on who's on the court, right? But they'll follow popular opinion based on which side they're on, okay? We need people in there who think for themselves, who don't just go along with popular opinion. People who are going to do what's right, no matter what the popular opinion seems to be at the time, okay? But anyway, that's me going off on a tangent. Let's keep going. There's another theory of morality, and it's Carol Gillian's theory of morality. Believe it or not, a lot of things we've been talking about, in general, a lot of things that, that are a lot of knowledge, a lot of things that we talk about are just male biased, okay? Like that, those theories that we just talked about of morality, according to Carol Gillian, which proposed a different theory of morality, that's more like the morality of men. That's more the way morality is for men. And she said that it's different for women, that women think a little bit differently when it comes to right and wrong. She said that, Carol Gillian, whose image you see there, right? She said that men and women are socialized different, right? We're taught different things, we're raised differently. And therefore we develop different views of morality, different views of what is right and wrong. She said that the morality for women, right and wrong for women, is related to the concept of being a good woman. Women are taught concern for others, to display their feelings, to care for others, right? It's more of an interpersonal thing. That's called the morality of care. Okay, so morality for women is more inclusive, more collectivist. Men are socialized to believe in rights and justice, that, rights and justice are more important. It's more of an individualistic thing. It's more about me, right? The morality of justice, right? And that's the kind of justice and morality that we kind of have in this country. It's more kind of male bias. It's individual rights and freedoms and that kind of stuff. It doesn't really consider the group so much. It's not so much collectivist, but Carol Gillian is saying that women think differently than that. When women think about what is right and wrong, it's not just about them, right? It's really, they have to think about other people, okay? Because they've been taught to be more inclusive, more nurturing, right? More people-oriented, okay? And here's Carol Gillian's theory of morality, okay? As it applies to, when it comes to the women's morality, okay? She said that at first, rules are governed by self-interest. At first, yes, it's selfish at first, right? Moral decisions are pragmatic, they're practical, right? When you're younger, when you're a kid, basically, what you decide is right and wrong has to do with what you think is going to be good for you. Like, will it work for me, right? It's kind of an egocentric thing. That's what happens when you're a kid in general. You're kind of egocentric, right? You want certain things. You don't want other things. You don't want punishment, things like that. So what you think is right is what gets you rewards, and what you think is wrong is what leads to punishment. Kind of what the other theories say, but that's self-interest, okay? But it's different as women get older. As women get older, they become concerned more about what they should do, what one should do, right? Their attachment to their parents grows, their responsibilities grow, right? Things they have to do and consider, right? They learn more that caring for others is important, right? And they learn self-sacrifice, that women have to sacrifice things, right? Sacrifice themselves for the good of others, for the good of their family, for the good of others, right? They learn things like that, okay? So that that morality can't just be a selfish thing. Later, women realize that caring for other people can also include caring for oneself, right? Caring for others also includes oneself. So caring for oneself is not necessarily selfish, but it's honest and fair, right? You have to care for yourself in order for you to care for others, because if you don't care for yourself, then you get sick and die, and then you can't really care for others, okay? And then eventually you enter the last stage of her theory, right? The last part of her theory, right? Where you resolve this conflict between caring for yourself and caring for others, right? It's a conflict at first, it's kind of a push-pull situation, right? You resolve this conflict, and then you have harmony and compassion govern moral action, where you basically learn to balance the two so that you can have, so you can be well-adjusted, because it's different for women. Women can't just be like men and selfish and not consider other people's needs. I know that's kind of how men are. That's kind of justice we have. It's me, my rights, and blah, 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 right? And that's the way it is, right? But for women, it can't always be me. They're taught differently. They have to consider other things, and they have to balance, family and their self-interest. They have to, balance several things. And when they think about what's right and what's wrong, it's not just something that is an individual thing. That's what she said. And I think she's got a very good point there. All right, let's keep going. All right, now we're going to talk about something a bit less interesting, but we have to talk about it, okay? Remember, we are talking about cognitive development, but now we have to talk about information processing, how we process information. You need to know about information processing theory. I'm not going to describe the theory a whole lot, but this theory basically says that when it comes to human thinking, right, the way it works is basically it works like a computer. Our brains are kind of like computers, right? So it compares human thinking processes by analogy to computer analysis of data. So our brains work like computers, right? So like computers, people sense and perceive large amounts of information. So like computers, we take in information. For us, it's through the senses, right? We seek units of information. We see things, we hear things, we smell things, taste things, we're gathering information. That's kind of like a search engine. You type into it and you seek out information, okay? We analyze information. We get information and we think about it, right? That's analyzing information. That's like software programs, right? Like the program that you use that basically, let's say that, when you're using the calculator to add this and that, or when you're using a statistical software program or whatever it is, the computer also analyzes information. When the computer plays a video, it's analyzing information, right? Whenever it runs any program, the computer is analyzing information. And then we express conclusions to others so others can understand. So we talk to people, we tell them what we think, we give out our conclusions. So we seek information, we analyze the information, and then we tell people about it. That would be like a network computer or a printout. That would be like a computer communicating with another computer, or a computer printing out a sheet of paper so that others can see, what basically the outcome is. If that analogy doesn't make too much sense to you, that our brains work like computers when it comes to thinking, don't worry about it too much. You basically just have to know that that's what information processing theory says, that our brains work like computers. You don't have to understand exactly how, okay? But those three parts there are trying to tell you how our brains do work like computers. And we have different kinds of memory. See, we have sensory memory, and this is really what makes a bit more sense about information processing theory. This is still part of information processing theory. So we have sensory memory, which is also called sensory memory. It's the component of information that, the component of the information processing system in which a stimulus information is stored for a split second to allow it to be processed. All right, let me explain that. Sensory memory, or our sensory register, is basically when our when our senses first gather information. We see things, we hear things, that kind of stuff. It enters our brain, right? That's sensory memory. It says it only lasts for a split second or two, maybe half a second to 2 seconds. That's about it. Sensory memory isn't really memory. It's just your senses taking in information. Okay. And then if you pay attention to the information, then it enters working memory, right? Working memory is also called short-term memory. It's called working memory because if you attend to the information, you're thinking about it, you're using it, you're processing it, right? That's the next step of memory. The component of information processing system in which conscious mental activity occurs, right? You're actively thinking about something, analyzing something, thinking about something. That is working memory. It doesn't matter, right? If you're reading a book, or if you're doing a math problem, or even if you're tying your shoes, whenever you are doing something, you are using your working memory. You're analyzing information. That's the next step. And that requires attention, okay? It's not just your senses, that's sensory memory, right? Now you are actively using information. You're consciously focusing on it. That's working memory. And then some information enters long-term memory. The component of the information processing system in which virtually limitless amounts of information can be stored indefinitely. So let me explain that. Actually, long-term memory is easy to understand. Long-term memory is basically when information is stored relatively permanently, and there seems to be no limit to how much information you can store in long-term memory. So first you gather information, that's sensory memory, right? Your senses. And then some information, you attend to some information, you use some information more than others, and that information goes into working memory, the information you actually use. And then some other information will then enter long-term memory where it's stored permanently. That's information processing theory. It says we have these three kinds of memory and one leads to the other. Okay. Here's more information about memory and how it works. How to basically in relation to development, right? So working memory, for instance, our ability to analyze information, process information, to think about things, that steadily improves. Okay, that continues to get better as we get older, right? We're children, we don't analyze information very well as children, but it gets better and better as we get older as children and continues to improve in adolescence. It improves a lot, okay? I'm not mentioning sensory memory there. Sensory memory basically is well set in childhood. Your senses work pretty well, but working memory continues to improve. Long-term memory, the capacity is virtually limitless by the end of middle childhood, right? By the time you're about 11, 12 years of age, right? Your long-term memory is basically limitless. There's no kind of limit to how much you can learn, okay? Memory storage expands over childhood, right? So our ability to store information, our ability to, to learn new things just keeps increasing, right? But actually retrieval is more important. It's more important that you can actually get the information out of long-term memory so you can use it, right? You can have a lot of things in there, but if you can't get them out, in other words, you can't really remember them, then it's kind of useless. But as the prefrontal cortex matures, as the very front part of our brain matures, right? Children are better able to use strategies. Children are better able to use strategies to help them learn. For instance, by associating, information with images or with sounds, or putting it into a song or something like that, right? As the front part of our brain matures, right? And that's the part of the brain that allows us to focus, pay attention, right? Control ourselves, control our emotions, and to plan, right? Planning, right? When you use those memory strategies, that is planning. You're deciding to use a certain strategy and you're kind of working out a sequence. You're working out something so that you can learn something. That is actual part of what the prefrontal cortex does. Let's keep going. Here some more information about how memory changes as we get older, okay? So under 2 years of age, memory is more implicit. I think we said something about this before, okay? But memory is more implicit. In other words, memory, before 2 years of age, memory has more to do with things that you can't really express, right? Implicit memory has to do with emotional memories and procedures. So you understand things that angered you, things that make you sad, or things that scare you as a child, right? And you love your mommy, your daddy, right? That's an emotional memory. And you remember how to crawl, how to walk, right? You can learn all that before age 2. right? Those are all implicit memories. Those are all memories that basically, they're hard to talk about, but they're there. Movement involves memory, so is emotion. That's how memory is like under 2 years of age. So memory can be triggered by sights and sounds, right? Because they can trigger emotions, okay? So looking at a certain toy can trigger a memory of how to play with it. That's a procedure, right? Or caregiver's voice can trigger the emotion, let's say, of just feeling safe, of happiness, right? Because it's the person who takes care of you, right? Remember actions and routines, and they remember actions and routines that involve them. They remember how to play with that toy, for instance. They remember how to crawl. That's how memory is under 2 years of age, right? It's implicit. You can't really talk about it. And what that means is that it has to do with emotions and procedures, emotions and movement, basically. 2 to 5 years of age, explicit memory begins. So 2 to 5 years of age, memory becomes more explicit. Explicit means that now you can talk about it more, right? Now words are used to encode and retrieve memories, although children do not use memory strategies. But now children can remember things by repeating them by rote, right? Remember a phone number by saying it over and over again. They learn nursery rhymes, so they can learn their alphabet, right? Memory becomes more explicit. Now they can tell you, yes, I remember this. Or they can tell you, they can sing the alphabet song, right? More explicit. Explicit memory has to do with words, okay, and episodes. So they remember what the words are, what certain things mean, right? And they remember episodes, remember doing certain things, right? That's explicit memory. By 5 to 7 years of age, they realize they need to remember some things more than others, and they start using strategies, more complicated strategies. Not just repeating something over and over, but that's one strategy, right? But now they do it on purpose, right? It's not efficient just repeat things over and over again, but it can lead to automatization, which we'll talk about in a moment. When things become automatic, actually, I'm not sure we'll get to it today, but that's when things become automatic because you repeat them over and over again. So by 5 to 7, they start using strategies such as repeating things over and over again. Before it, they use memory strategies as well, and repetition, but here they're doing it more intentionally, okay? And they're actually using strategies, okay? Other advances in memory, by 7 to 9 years of age, they learn new strategies, right? Including visual cues, visualizing things, okay? Remembering how something looks to remember what it is or what it's called, right? Auditory things. So they're still using strategies, right? Rhymes, letters, right? There's evidence of brain functions called the visual spatial sketchpad. The visual spatial sketchpad basically is a part of the brain basically that helps you learn visual information. And there's also the phonological loop, the part of the brain that basically helps you learn things that have to do with sound, remember things that have to do with sound. So children benefit from organizing things to be remembered. So here they learn new strategies, right? Rhymes, visual cues, that kind of stuff, right? So their use of strategies are getting better as they get older. By 9 to 11 years of age, memory becomes more adaptive. So memory gets even better, right? And strategic, right? Children are better able to learn various memory techniques from teachers and other children. So now they learn other techniques from children, right? And teachers, more advanced memory strategies. They can organize material themselves now. You don't have to do it for them, right? They can develop their own memory aids, their own memory tricks, so to speak, to understand something or to remember something. Let's see how we're doing on time. We're doing okay. Let's keep going. More about information processing. So processing information, right, is affected by your knowledge base, control processes, speed of processing, executive function. We're going to talk about all these things. This is part of information processing, okay? So your memory, how you learn, how you analyze information is influenced by all those things. Let's talk about the knowledge base first. That's the easiest one to understand. So how much knowledge you have, how much you know, right? An extensive knowledge base, okay? So the more you know, the easier it is for you to master new related information. It helps your memory. The more you learn, the easier it is to learn. The more information you have, the easier it is for you to remember something. Okay, and the easier it is for you to learn something, right? Knowledge base grows, right? You know a lot of things, and then it's easier to make connections to new things that you have to learn. That's the knowledge base, right? It's influenced by experience, right? The more experience you have, the more you learn, the more your knowledge base grows, right? Opportunities, of course, right? Having opportunities to go to school or to go to a museum or to travel, whatever it is, the more opportunity, the better, which is why those that are disadvantaged, underprivileged, right, often won't have as much knowledge. They haven't had as much enrichment in their lives. They haven't been able to travel or do a lot of things that the rich people do, right? And all that is learning, all that is experience, right? And also motivation matters a lot. Do you really care about things? Do you really care about learning that or doing this or that? The more you care, the more your knowledge base grows. If you really care about cars, if you love cars, for instance, you probably have an extensive knowledge base about cars. You know all about engines and the horsepower and the kind of tires the cars come with, you know, when you buy it off the dealership. You know all sorts of things that most people don't know because you're a car person, so to speak, or car guy. It's usually guys, right? The more motivated you are, the more you care about something, the more you like something, the easier it is to learn, the more your knowledge base grows. I care a lot about science, and I watch a lot of stuff about science, psychology related, but also other things about geology, about astronomy. I watch stuff on TV, on YouTube about that stuff, and I have a lot of knowledge about this stuff, and it's easier for me to learn it because I already know a lot about it. As the knowledge base grows, your ability to learn, the ability to remember things, well, increases. Control processes also matter. Control processes are neurological mechanisms. They have to do with the brain, okay? Control processes, these are things that have to do with, you know, how we organize information, prioritize it, right? Some information is more important than others, okay? And how we direct mental operations. So we organize information in our minds. We consider some information more important than others, so we're more likely to remember that information, let's say, than other details. Like for instance, maybe that's not a good example of prioritization, but let's say I know how many acres there are in a square mile for some reason. I find that stuff interesting, right? There are 660 acres in a square mile. I happen to know that. I care about stuff like that. I love the outdoors and land, and I happen to know how many acres are in a square mile. You know, I want to own land, actually. To me, the more land I own, the better. I love like having space and freedom to move and all that stuff. So I prioritize certain information, right? I see that information and say, oh, that's important. I want to know that. And I pay more attention to it. And I happen to know how many acres there are in a mile, but hectares, what the hell is that, right? I know it's related to acres. I know it's not the same as an acre, but I don't really know how many hectares or hectaacres are in a mile because I don't consider that as important. Acres is good enough for me. So I prioritize that, right? Direct mental operations, what you're going to pay attention to, what you're going to ignore, that kind of stuff, right? Control processes are also often called executive processes, right? Because you are actually directing information, right? Directing the flow and the storage of information. And the ability to use these control processes is also called executive function, which we'll talk about later as a separate thing, but control processes are a part of executive function. And your control processes will improve with age and experience, right? As you get older and you learn more and you know more, your ability to organize information, to prioritize it, to basically, direct it, right? To learn about this or that, it will get better, okay? Your ability to filter information, for instance. Speed of processing also matters, okay? Speed of processing is how quickly you can think, how quickly you can remember things, okay? It continues to improve, you know, through childhood and adolescence, right? Your ability to remember things, how quickly you remember things, and how quickly you can think and read and analyze and solve math problems, that speed of processing, all that continues to improve because of advances in myelination. Remember, myelin is that fatty tissue around the axon that makes information travel faster. Because of dendrites, they become more dense and therefore easier. They're more likely to connect to other neurons. Okay, and advances in the frontal cortex, the prefrontal cortex, that allows you to focus, pay attention, right? Advances in all those things improves how quickly you can process information. Repetition matters, of course, you know, it matters as well, right? Repetition, repeating the information over and over again, looking at it again and again, right? What you're doing when you're repeating something is you're using the same pathways in the brain. Same neurons are communicating again and again. So repetition makes neurons fire instantaneously in more coordinated ways, right? The more you think about something, the more you analyze something, the better you get at it, right? It gets easier because pathways are strengthened in the brain, and then the information flows more quickly and is more coordinated. That all affects speed of processing. Repetition, right, speeds up thinking. At first, for instance, giving a speech in front of the class might be difficult, right? But the more you do it, the more you repeat it, the easier it gets. And then when you get really good at it, you can do it really well, right? You can think more quickly. It also frees up your capacity and your memory. Not only can you give your speech, but you can also respond to questions that people may give you as you're giving your speech, and then be able to still continue your speech. You can be interrupted and still continue, right? So it frees up capacity, your ability to think, your ability to remember things and answer questions. When you're new at it, you're not that good at it. And there you are giving your speech and you can't think of anything. And all you do is read the damn paper, right? And when somebody asks you a question, you can't even think, can't even answer the question, even if it's easy, because you're not that good at it yet, right? You need more repetition, you need more practice. Over time with repetition, you develop what's called automatization, right? Automatization requires repetition, practice, right? It takes years. So with anybody, but especially with children, the more they do something, the better they get, right? The more they read, the more they write, the more they solve those math problems, the easier it gets. And you have to keep working, you have to keep studying, you have to keep learning, you have to keep going to school, and you get better and better. And by the way, you know, we have these long summer breaks, and people lose cognitive skills over the summer. Kids lose skills over the summer, and then they go back to school in the fall. And because of this lack of practice, teachers often have to go back and basically, you know, and teach some of those things that they should know already. They have to, I think that's called remediation, basically. You know, they have to go back and teach some things that they should have known already, and basically make them catch up, and then move on from there and teach the things that they really should be teaching at that grade level. It happens to all of us, by the way, but the less we use our brains, the more we forget, the worse we get at things. I used to be an engineering major, believe it or not, when I first started college. I used to be really good at math. I was really good at math, and the counselor said, yeah, you should be an engineer, right? I was really good at math and science, took a lot of APs and stuff, and I was really good at that stuff. But I've been teaching psychology for 15 years now, and I went to graduate school. I did like 6 years of psychology education there, right? And then 4 years before that of college education. I had like 10 years of college education, 15 years of teaching, mostly psychology. I'm really good at psychology now. That's what I know. Can I still do math? Yeah, I can still do math, but I'm not as good at it as I used to be. I can still, yeah, go and probably have to look at those books, and I can probably remember how to do that calculus, how to do a lot of those things, but I'm just not going to be that good anymore. It's going to take me a long time for me to kind of, you know, exercise my brain, so to speak, and get good at it again. But I used to be good at it. But it's not the direction that I took as far as my career. Let's see, one more thing, and we're done. Executive function. Executive function, remember, is control processes are part of executive function. So executive function is basically your brain basically directing information, the flow of information, making decisions, that kind of stuff. Think of executive function just like what an executive does. When you have the executive in the company, right, the CEO or something like that, that's the person who decides, you know, what the company is going to do to become profitable, for instance, or decide what new products they should actually work on, you know, whatever it is. It's where the decision making happens. So the executive function in your brain has to do with that, with decision making. Okay, it involves several things like metacognition. Metacognition is thinking about thinking. So it's not enough to just think, right? Executive function means you think about your own thinking. So you can, you know, let's say you know how to complete a task, right? But you not only know how to complete it, you evaluate how you do that task. So you evaluate a cognitive task to determine how best to accomplish it. So you may know how to do it, right? But you think about that and you decide it's probably, let me try and do it this way. Let me try something different, right? So you're thinking about your own thinking. You monitor and you adjust your performance on that task, and you change strategies. That's metacognition. That's you thinking about thinking. It improves with age and experience, of course. The more you do it, the more you think, the better you get at it, right? And you're better able to control. You don't just know what you're doing, solve problems and stuff like that, but you can adjust your strategies. You can think about the way you actually think and what works best for you, right? Meta memory is knowing about memory, right? You think about your own memory, which is a mental thing, and how to improve it, how to use strategies. All that is part of executive function. It's all part of the decision-making that happens in the brain. The decision-making that happens in the brain doesn't just have to do with the things you physically do or the problems you solve or, or reading or memorizing things, but it's also about your brain actually, directing how that information is used, how it's prioritized, how it's stored, the strategies that you use to learn it. All that is executive function. You don't just take in information, right, and that's it. But you use executive function. You basically organize information. You prioritize it. You think about your own thinking and how it's working, and you adjust accordingly if you need to. That is all information processing. Okay, so we're done with information processing. I'm going to stop recording now. The next time we'll talk about language.